All right, this question's from Joe. Joe, I don't have room on my screen to put all your stuff up there, so I just said vaccines. But this is Joe's question. He says, very soon vaccines may become a hot topic. Will they mandate a COVID-19 vaccine, ? And then he's asked, what if the vaccine comes from the stems that used fetal stem cells to produce them? Where should Christians stand? And this is, I mean, you're going to comment, but on Facebook, what I see is Christians and non-Christians really having two different opinions on this. You have one group that says, you know what, I don't want anything to do with aborted fetuses in the vaccine. And then you have a look that says, I don't want these man-made chemicals in my body. I want to do the way God created it. And then you have this group over here that's saying, you're evil, you're going to destroy the world because your kids aren't vaccinated and they're going to infect everybody and everybody's going to die. So Two major camps. What do you say to Christians and in this case right here?
I'll just give you my opinion on this. I don't want to have anything to do with killing babies at all. Right. You know, and so the whole aborted fetus line type of thing, that is a game changer for me. And the problem with this, you guys, is that it hasn't always been like this. So for example, specifically in the MMR vaccine, this is something that I researched not too long ago because people were asking questions about this. The rubella part of the MMR vaccine is the part that comes from aborted fetal lines. It didn't used to be like that. And what's happened is the pharmaceutical companies have abandoned the vaccines that come from non-aborted tissues, and sometimes it comes from animal tissues and that kind of thing. And that's something that everybody who's a believer should be complaining about, specifically to the manufacturers. And this is something that I know that politicians and people who are involved in this are starting to pay attention to. There's some options for some of these things now, and specifically with the MMR, there's some places where they're starting to be able to get those from non-fetal lines. At least that's the information that I've gotten from some people. I haven't checked that out specifically, but I know some people that have been able to do that. And so that's what I would be complaining about. As far as doing it naturally and that kind of thing, there's some things that I've got issues with the vaccination protocols and stuff. When my kids were small, there were relatively few vaccines that they needed to get, and what's happening now is there's just lists of them.
And they're doing like 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 vaccines at a time.
Yeah.
In one shot.
Right. And so I know some doctors who consider this to be problematic. And again, I would be careful with that. I would try to find a doctor that would be willing to be reasonable with this stuff. I don't mind giving my kids vaccines. I'm way past that now, but I wouldn't mind giving my kids vaccines. But you're going to come along and give my kid a vaccine, 10 different vaccines at the same time. It's like, come on, let's be reasonable about this. Let's one a week. How about that? Something along those lines. And so I try to be reasonable with them. I know people who have had polio. I know people who've had whooping cough. I know people who have had some of these diseases, and they're dangerous, and they will maim people, and they will kill children. And so there's a whole view out there that I'm not going to vaccinate my kid for anything, and the whole point of view where it's like you guys are being ridiculous and you're endangering other kids. It's absolutely true. I have some people that I know really well, for example, that didn't have their little girl vaccinated for whooping cough. Well, she got it, and it was really bad, like almost to death, really bad, and so changed the view at that point when your kid's looking like they're going to die of whooping cough, and so. I think that's it's important to be paying attention to. Again, if I was a parent, I would be careful about, careful in the sense of I care about where these things come from. And so I would be paying attention to that. But, and I'm not a huge medicine guy, but I don't want my kid getting polio. I don't, there's no reason for that. Some of these vaccines, I think that they're over the top. The whole chickenpox vaccine, come on, it's chickenpox.
Right.
Yeah, nobody dies of chickenpox, not unless they got some other issue that's huge, and that kind of thing. I had the measles when I was a kid, and I think there's some scary stuff about the measles. My family, I didn't have the mumps specifically, but some people in my family had the mumps. It was before the vaccinations were popular or being mandated and that kind of thing. And so I'd rather not have the measles. I was in a locked room, or I was quarantined for 3 to 5 days. I think it was 3 days in a room that was dark, because measles can have an effect on your eyesight. So a lot of these diseases are pretty bad, and I wouldn't want my kid to go through them. But again, I think there's a reasonable alternative to many times the ways that these things are being brought across, and I understand that people don't want their kids vaccinated with 10 vaccines at a time. I get that.
Right.
But on the other hand, God's put us in a position where we live in a world where kids don't have to die of things that kids were dying of 100 years ago. And so maybe watch out for that.
So would you say, because one of the arguments that people I think have, and validly, is that there's a lot of people out there, including doctors, there's a lot of advocates like Michael Savage, who's a talk show guy, who, and nurses and stuff, people in the medicine field who will talk about things like the flu shot, and that their kid was fine, then they got the flu shot, pumped them with man-made chemicals, and all of a sudden their kid was not fine. And I always call it Down syndrome, but that's not it. But what happens when you...
Autism.
Autism.
Right.
And it was like a visible thing. Mm-hmm. And then you go, hey, my kid got this vaccine, my kid got this flu shot, my kid got this, and then there's nothing that you can do about it, because the pharmaceutical companies, you can't sue them, you can't do anything. And so you have all these people who are saying these things with documented cases, and then the parents trying to go, I don't know what to do. I don't want to have my kid to have polio, and yet what happens if I give my kid a vaccine and he's part of that 1% that has a reaction, and all of a sudden his life's messed up? To me, it's like a big dilemma.
Yeah. One of the things I need to point out about the autism, there was a study that was done, autism study. And the guys who did the study came back and said that their data was flawed.
So there is no?
Yeah. The study that people are pointing to is something that's been repudiated by the guys who did the study.
Okay.
And so that's not to say that the anecdotal situation is not true. Obviously you have a parent that is looking at a situation where their kid didn't, he was fine until he got a vaccine, and the next, and immediately afterwards, something was triggered.
Right.
I'm not a doctor. I can't know if
Right.
that was the vaccine or if that was a genetic issue that comes on at a certain time in life, or those kinds of things. But I'm not going to just dismiss that. But what I'm telling you is the study that's always pointed to is not anything that you can point to anymore rationally, actually with integrity. Because again, it's been something that's been repudiated. And so I think that there may be something going on there, and I think, again, that it needs to be studied. But when you're talking about dying versus autism, dying's not good.
Right.
So again, and if you're talking about a situation where, again, the reason that we have these vaccines is because a lot of these diseases were so horrific in the times where there were literally epidemics of these situations, and so a lot of that stuff has to do with caring about the people around you and that kind of thing. And so again, I'm not a guy who's against vaccines. I think that they should be done reasonably and that kind of stuff. Turns out, actually, I was thinking about this. I've never had the chicken pox. And for years, I was very careful about having the chicken, being around my kids with the chicken pox and that kind of thing, because it can be bad for somebody who's older. And then I realized that when I was 7 years old, I was given a series of vaccines because we were going to move over to Guam. And so I had 45 different shots. I'm wondering if there wasn't a chicken pox shot in there at some point. I'd totally forgotten about that. And so I'm one of those guys who's had an overabundance of vaccinations. The only time I've ever fainted was when I was getting those shots when I was a kid. And so
looking at you, they may be encouraged to go get vaccines, or
or
they may
maybe
be
not.
like,
Maybe it's why I don't have any hair, you guys. Maybe that's what's going on. But when I'm looking at this stuff, I try to be reasonable about it, and I don't want to. I certainly don't want my kid to get certain diseases, and I certainly don't want to pass those things on to somebody else. And so you need to be informed, and don't get your information off internet websites that are agenda driven. You have to have your information. And so somebody the reason I know that about that study that I was talking about is because somebody referred me to that. And so I just went on a search for that, and I found out the history of it. And so again, you need to do, and I'm not saying that the internet's bad. Obviously that's where I got a lot of this information, but I try to do informed sources, that kind of thing, and not people with agendas. And do my best. I know that I can't guarantee that all the time, but I do my best. So.